Santi, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, JD.
So, as we do with every guest, I'd like to ask you what it is you do and how is it that you make an impact on the world?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's super happy to be here. I am currently and recently just joined a government affairs firm. So I work with a number of clients to help them advance their policy and political priorities. But I am coming off of a long career working on Capitol Hill, most recently as a legislative director, top policy staffer for a senator. And so kind of going through a transition right now, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, I think in that previous role and also in many ways in this role, I get to touch on a lot of different types of issues, whether it's healthcare, poverty, or immigration, or any of those kinds of things. And so I feel like it's not quite super specific, but I get to sort of work on kinds of things across different kinds of issues that has effects and impacts on the world in lots of different ways. So that's
How is it
that's
that you got into this? Was it since you were very young, you wanted to work in Congress, work in politics and policy? And how does that connect with your faith? I imagine faith was a big factor.
yeah. I uh I actually interestingly enough had no thoughts or desires or interest in working in policy or politics for most of my life. I grew up in Colorado. I loved science. Like that was my favorite subject. And so for most of my life, I thought I wanted to be a doctor. And so that was kind of the track that my folks put me on. And there was kind of a few doctors, I guess, in the family. I don't really know where it came from, except for that I knew I wanted to help people. Certainly that was a desire that came from probably my faith. My parents are both followers of Jesus. And so I think that that was a thing. But I in college recognized that I actually absolutely hated and couldn't deal with blood, like, in
Yeah.
bodily fluids, and I
I've
it
heard
was
this story before. How did you realize that? Was it like
yeah,
all at once when you were shadowing or?
yeah, it was interesting. So, everybody says when you wanna be a doctor, you should go through a shadowing process, you should find a doctor who's willing to let you sort of suit up and go into the office with him. So, I'd actually been on a sort of a mission trip, and I in that during that trip, I was able to work with a number of doctors doing sort of community work, but then part of it was also working with him and a surgeon in a hospital, and for whatever reason, one of the I don't even want to call it a rotation, but one of the sort of shadowing experiences I had was a brain surgery. So I
So
go in
some brain blood.
Yeah, so I go into this place. It was in an emergency room, and so a little girl had been on a motorcycle, and they had crashed, and so her brain was swelled up, and it was huge issue, and so they go in, and honestly, it was a successful surgery, but all I could remember was how I was actually, like, incapable physically of being in the room, like, the nurses were standing around me being like, "Hey, do you need do you need help?" I was, like, right in the face, like, "I can't do this," like anyways, and then I tried again a couple different times, and, like, I just recognized that, like, biochemically, which I studied biochemistry, so this is totally legit, my reactions to these kinds of smells and
Right.
seeing these
You
kinds
just
of
weren't
things,
wired this way.
it was just not
You
I
were
was
not
not
someone.
wired to do it, and so, anyway, so that's the long story behind me having a crisis of faith and having a crisis around things, then recognizing that I still wanted to help people and eventually, through a long winded process, found public health and health policy
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
sort of,
share more about that. And it's aligned with some of our top cause areas at Christians for Impact. And we focus on causes that aren't just things that God cares about that affect a lot of people in very serious ways, but that are also really solvable, right? There's clear things that individuals can do to make an impact, and that given how solvable they are, they seem really neglected. So we would consider global health one of those, and public health is quite related to that. So you have a master's in public health. Share a little bit more about how you made that pivot to public health and what that looked like for you.
Yeah, it was a really, I would say, God ordained kind of situation. I mentioned I was kind of hit a crisis when I realized I didn't want to be a doctor. I think that was like everybody's expectation for my life. And then I sort of discovered and took a summer course on global health as sort of in college and recognized that the kinds of things that I cared about, which was mental, spiritual, as well as physical health, were things that you didn't just have to do on an individual level, but you could create systems or you could create programs that affected people and promoted their health on a wider scale. And so I was super drawn to that because I, uh, in my studies and in some of how I was thinking, I was like, I could go into like the pharmaceutical industry, which is an amazing industry where you're able to actually save people's lives by creating some sort of like the biggest hot topic right now is mRNA vaccines that cure cancer. Like it is like an incredible thing, right? And I also wasn't a lab person. Like I wanted to be around people. And so public health was kind of a big way. And so I really discovered it kind of on accident. I took this course. The guy who was teaching it was mentioning public health strategies and all these things. And so I just kind of dove into it and discovered that if I still wanted to do this kind of work, support people's physical health, mental health, spiritual health, that it was a really good avenue to do that. So I really just started to ask that question. Like, I in college was working with a bunch of kids whose parents had cancer, and we had an organization that would support those families. Because a lot of those kids, if your parents have cancer, they find themselves not to their parents' fault, but like they find themselves neglected or like experiencing something that other 8-year olds have never experienced. And so we had a program where we would give them free summer camp. And I just recognized that I just loved the feeling of being able to do that and felt like I was in my calling to be able to do that in that space. And so it was kind of this beautiful conglomeration of all sorts of experiences that I had had, as well as loving to study and loving to discover new systems and processes and understand things. And yeah, public health fell into that. And then the politics really came into
Yeah, so you got a master's in public
yeah.
health, and where was that again?
Yeah, so I attended school at GW, George Washington University, the Milken School of Public Health. It's one of the best public health schools in the country. And yeah, so I just came in there and
And were
again,
you when you started that? I'm guessing you weren't expecting to get involved in politics. I guess weren't expecting to become a staffer on the Hill.
absolutely not. In my mind, I was going to do some sort of local public health program.
Kind of like what you'd done for the families with cancer.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I That was sort of what I envisioned, but I wanted to do it at sort of a more evidence-based level, and that's what I thought. And I found myself in, again, a number of classes. It's Washington D.C., so you have a lot of people who have worked in politics and policy at sort of the highest levels in government, and they were professors of mine in class, and I, were was studying under them. And I decided, one day I was going to finish my master's in public health, move back to Colorado, which is where I grew up and am from, and do that work. And a couple of my professors said, "Hey, before you leave town, you should consider doing some sort of federal internship or political internship, because while you're in DC, why wouldn't you do that?" And at the time, I didn't know much and I really trusted them. And so I was like, great, I'm going to try to figure this out. So I somehow found myself getting a fellowship on the Hill with a senator from my state who I went on to work for many years. But I sort of accidentally fell into it. Like it was not a thing that I had ever anticipated. But while I was in it, and we can get into this a little more, while I was in it, I recognized that it had all of the sort of kinds of things that I was passionate about and was interested in, and it was super high impact. And so I ended up a month and a half into that fellowship. I recognized that politics and the policy world was exactly what I wanted to be doing with my life.
Sorry to interrupt the show, but I wanted to take 5 seconds to invite you to join me and 200 other impact focused Christians tackling the world's biggest problems with God's help in DC and in London this November. So we're going to meet for our 2026 conference. We're going to have speakers like the one you're listening to in this podcast, maybe more, even better ones. And I hope to see you there. You can sign up today. Tickets start at just £50. Sign up before prices rise. That's November 13th to 15th in Washington, D.C., and November 27th to 29th in London. Hope to see you there. What are some examples of how politics policy translated into real world outcomes for the sick?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what did that look like? Because I think a lot of people, they hear programs, they think systems, they hear scale. It can be dehumanizing. And initially, they might have been drawn like you were to that kind of clinical practice. So, where do you see those outcomes from what at times is maybe like very strategic, abstract work?
Yeah. I'll just give you the
Maybe a
example.
couple bills or like, a couple examples. Yeah.
So everybody says like there's always this aha moment where you catch the hill bug is kind of what people say. And I joined this office, and the center I was working for was on two major health committees, and it was a little bit of an intense moment. Republicans were trying to overturn the Affordable Care Act, and it was just like there was so much going on. It was the same year that all of these FDA programs needed to get reauthorized, and CDC program. Like it was just such a crazy year in 2017, which is when this all started. Uh, um, the center I was working for was working on a lot of different projects, and they said, "Can you just run point on this one project?" And it was to reauthorize a program called the Preemie Act. What the Preemie Act does was it was a research program to research how to address, prevent premature births. And so there's obviously a ton of different kinds of things that go into why a baby might be born ahead of their due date. And so it was a small program in the grand scheme of things. It was like a $10 million dollar program over 10 years, which that sounds like a lot of money, but in the federal government, it's
In
like a
like a
drop
$7 trillion budget, that's really, yeah.
yeah. And so they put me on that project, and it was a bipartisan, bicameral. There were all these advocates that were supporting the work that would introduce us to um, individuals, moms, parents who had kind of gone through this, and you could see that in the research, it was leading to changes in the way that we actually care for that OBGYNs practiced, or that we care for moms, or the kinds of supplements that they need to take. And it all really stemmed from this one program that was studying this called the Preemie Act. And so I got to work on that project. We renegotiated it. It was kind of like the perfect little conglomeration of of the right pieces fitting together so that it got reintroduced. And a year later, I think it finally passed. And it was this amazing thing where I just looked at myself and like, this is amazing. Like everybody's working together.
It's not always like dog eat dog, like
Yeah, I'm like,
getting each
oh,
other's
it's
throats. Like there are
easy.
issues that
Yeah,
almost all Americans care about, and we need bipartisan committees to help.
exactly. And so at the time I had told myself, this is easy. Like I could do this. This is really feel
Do you
good.
remember the math of like how many infants and how many mothers you helped with this program?
I mean, I will have to go back and look, and I'm sure I could probably Google it right now and figure it out. But it certainly over the course of the past 20 years, we've seen the number of premature births decrease. It's really United States is really, really tough statistics when it comes to giving birth. And so,
Right, because we're more like a middle income country, right, in terms of the
yeah,
outcomes here
it's
for
wild. Like in terms of how mothers and pregnant women sort of experience that whole process, like the US is pretty not the best place to do it. Most other high income OECD countries operate way better for a whole host of reasons, but we wouldn't probably know any of those reasons if it wasn't for research like this. So that was cool. So anyways, it gave me the bug, and I decided this was where I wanted to stay, and I wanted to do this for probably potentially the rest of my life.
yeah, yeah. And I'm curious if in your soul searching it ever came up like a trade-off between focusing on national issues versus focusing on international issues regarding health, right? Both are important, but both have different levers to influence them, right? Until recently, the US, maybe we still are, but at least before, much more so, US was the largest funder of foreign aid and especially health support. For instance, for moms who would otherwise pass on HIV to their children. We had a podcast about that a few episodes ago. And just the sheer numbers are shocking, right? The amount of good that the U.S. has done by funding PEPFAR, for instance, millions of lives, millions of lives. Even the conservative estimates are extreme. When you think about that possibility for good, seeing all souls as equal and all human beings of equal dignity to God, did you ever did you ever work to prioritize global health issues alongside the U.S. public health issues?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really, really good reflection on how important US leadership has been in the past couple of decades to address a lot of these concerns. The class I told you I took and that got me interested in public health was a global health class. So that was truly sort of my conduit into the space. And I would say because of what I got to do, I primarily did work on sort of national, federal, US based programs for the most part. But a lot of my work also in particular was to do with migrant populations, so refugee groups and immigrants. And I did get to work on a lot of global health kind of issues. I particularly worked on antimicrobial resistance for a really long time, which basically we have antibiotics that have worked for many years, but because of the way that biochemistry functions, different types of infections get smarter. And so we don't actually have all the tools that we need to address sepsis or address kind of some of these things that are consistently, if left unaddressed, could very easily kill somebody. And
Yes.
I think
It's
I
one
got
argument for eating less meat, right? Because
yeah,
a lot of these
yes.
superbugs are bred on factory farms, right?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time doing that. That was probably like my global health pet project that we worked on.
Did you have any like committees or bills that were connected to that?
Yeah, we worked primarily on a bill called the Pasteur Act, which I don't think has been introduced this Congress, but basically what it would do is it was working with drug manufacturers and creating a different kind of payment method for these drugs, essentially because antibiotics are so cheap, they're not a great investment for people to invest in because they're so cheap, they cost like
Right.
$2.
There's
And
no
so
pharmaceutical that's like trying to innovate those. Right.
yeah, so how do you create an incentive structure to innovate in that space?
Do you think like advanced market commitment works well?
Yeah, so the way that the bill structured, which it's actually like given our healthcare system incredibly complicated, but we created a sort of subscription model is kind of how it worked, where a federal government could pay, let's say, $1 billion over 3 years and commit that they were going to give that money, and then the drug manufacturer would just supply the antibiotic as needed. And so it was an incentive because you're actually creating certainty in the marketplace for an investor to say, okay, if this company gets that subscription contract, then we know that we will have this amount of money sort of flowing in over the course of the next 3 years. And so it was trying to do that again, like I said, because our healthcare system in the US is so complicated. It actually is much more complicated, but you have places like Sweden and the UK and Japan actually implementing programs like this because it works. But their healthcare systems are probably a lot less complicated than the United States.
Yeah, that's incredible. I know some Christians in our community have worked on some economics research into this, looking at like how much we would value an advanced market commitment for RNA vaccines. I think it was Brandon Joltan. He has a paper on this that estimated the value of it to be something like $60 billion. And if you look at like what it would actually cost, it's like a tenth or a hundredth of the benefits that you would get. Yeah, this seems to be like one of those spaces where everybody, regardless what side of the aisle they're on, just agree that the sheer calculus of it, like the sheer, like what's at stake is just so high that if the government's going to spend money on anything, like spending money on things like mRNA or on antimicrobial resistance is like far and away the best possible investment. And it
Yeah.
also protects our own citizens.
Yeah. Yeah, one would hope. I would say we are currently in the past couple of years living in a place where it's actually really difficult, I think, to get any big programs like that off the ground, particularly in the United States. But I think those kind of innovative ways of paying for things using these kinds of innovative payment structures is really important because right now the system just doesn't work as it should. And you have a lot of people that are sick when they shouldn't need to be because the system's just broken.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, here, this is sorry, I actually underestimated the amount. So Brandon Joel Tan's paper found that in the case of advanced preparations for future pandemics, a program spending up to $60 billion upfront would expand capacity and $5 billion every year thereafter. And the present value of that from preventing future losses from future pandemics would be nearly $18 trillion, what Brandon Joel Tan and Rachel Glenister from the CGD found. CGD, IMF. I mean, just sheer incredible numbers.
Yeah.
It's a really exciting space. Actually, if anyone listening is interested in that space and getting connected with fellowships or policy in that space, we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to introduce you to people. That's awesome. So, and this connects back really to Jesus and New Testament teaching. Like for me, part of the reason I got involved in these impact spaces, in effective altruism, in really interested in policy, was because I learned I was never a political person. I wouldn't consider myself political now, even still, but I knew that every person matters to God, right? Every person matters to God. And the fact that the fact that many mothers have to outlive their own children, like I was at a fundraiser the other night where 70% of the mothers that this charity ICM surveyed had a child who had died. The majority of the women they were working with in ultra poor neighborhoods in the Philippines, the majority of them had buried one of their children. And the idea that we have to live in a world where that's the majority for some communities is like, it's awful. And every child matters to God, and every child deserves the chance to grow up and know God and God's love for them, and that isn't possible if they don't have the healthcare they need. So that to me, and realizing that the difference that I could make, that like, with a yearly donation to effective charities over the course of my lifetime, I could save busloads of kids, right? That's on offer. That's right there for us. Or that through policy you could do even more good. I found that just so exciting. I'm curious for you, like, how did your faith in those values connect with this work in policy? Before we move on to maybe some examples in the Bible, maybe that's where we should jump to now. Like, see this as like a step away from faith, or like pulling away from faith, or is this like kind of affirming something you see in Scripture and from biblical examples? Sorry, a lot of questions in one, but I'm very
It's
enthusiastic about this, and I'm really keen to hear
really
what you
important,
think.
I think. Yeah, it's really important. I think, I mean, why I appreciate the way that the positivity around what you're talking about is because I think that you actually have to fight for this kind of view about the fact that that all these kids matter, that like these are not just numbers, these are not just statistics, they're not just like, over a third of moms have to
I mean,
do.
the numbers are, it's like 15,000 kids a day. I think it's like 4 or 5 million kids a year die from mostly preventable diseases. Yeah,
Exactly, and I think it can so easily become that and this is something that I fought against in politics, just like my own mental ability to always be connecting it back to a face or a name was so important to me because and it gets to your point of, I don't think I could have worked in politics or worked in this space if it wasn't because I felt like I was called to, and because it was a place that I feel like the Lord had me in the season that he has had me, including sort of what I'm doing now, which is, I think every single person is in a certain kind of environment where they can either choose to be obedient to operate in the way of Jesus in where they're at, or they can choose to ignore that voice and do the same exact job, but not in a way that is in the way of Jesus. And I think you'll have Christians who are going to be, and I felt this pull. It was, am I going to do these jobs? These really like, I know that, and we've talked about this in the past, like not trying to not be super political, like in my job. And even now, like I am incredibly political. And so how do you do that in a way that both honors other humans and the fact that they're made in the image of God and that God loves them, even if they're my opponent or whatever it is politically, but doing things in a way where I'm also following in the way of Jesus and trying to do my best to do that. And it is extremely difficult, but to your point, which I think we can talk about more, there's plentiful examples in the scriptures of
yeah. What are
individual.
some of the biblical examples that inspire you, that motivate you?
Yeah, yeah. I think one of my favorites is the story of Joseph and the fact that he was what we might say nowadays was trafficked, and he found himself in a home.
Wait a second, Sandy. I'm going to go back 1 second and I'm going to ask it in a way that's very clippable for social media because this will do really well on social media. Um, okay, Santi, you have a successful career in the Senate, prioritizing bills that serve the least of these. What are some biblical examples of Christians or people of faith working in policy that inspire you?
Yeah. I think that one of my favorites that I've thought about and people have reminded me over the years is the story of Joseph. And Joseph was somebody who we would probably consider now as having been trafficked. He was brought to a place that was not his home. And he was serving a kingdom and in a place that was certainly not following the same God as he was. But he worked really, really hard, eventually just became an expert in so many kinds of systems that the kingdom needed solutions for. And he had these incredible systems of how to feed the people. We hear about how he fed in famine, and he was leading that entire effort. Like, I'm thinking about right now, there's millions and millions of Americans who are losing their health support and or their food support and food assistance. And we're in the middle of a government shutdown, and people could be even more people could be losing that. And so that's just like a distinction towards this. But Joseph really became a pro at what he was doing, but he always had his relationship with Yahweh at the forefront. And we didn't necessarily like, we saw that in the way that he operated in the kingdom that he was working under. But then you also saw that in the way that he operated in his family and with his community. And so I think like that is the example that I always think about when I think about what it means to serve in politics under in a kingdom that is not necessarily, we say it's under God, but
Pharaoh is not
that's
exactly like a super Christ-like person, right? And
exactly
you know the incredible thing about Joseph too, and what I love about it as well, as you pointed out, it's not just him serving the nation and the world, right? The whole area, the whole region, welcoming foreigners and refugees, but it's also providing for his family, right? It's doing both at the same time. And I think it shows you don't have to trade off caring and providing for your family to care about the needs of the world, to also dedicate your vocation to the needs of the world.
right, right. And just to complicate it even further, like it's a family that was the group of people that led to his enslavement. And so I think it's just a good reminder, whether you look at him, whether you look at the story of Daniel, who was like working for, again, a king who was enslaving his people, and or you look at Esther, or you look at any of these people who took the opportunity that they had and they imagined a better world for not just their people, but for the world. Like, they were not exclusively thinking about how can my people group and everybody that looks like me benefit from my leadership. They consistently looked at how can I better the world around me and usher in the way that God envisioned this world, and how can I be the conduit to make that happen? And I think that it's really important that when they were in incredibly high stress situations, I like Joseph was accused of horrible things by Pharaoh's wife, right? Like, that story is totally not told enough, or the serious of it is not explained enough. But the way that he operated in integrity and in faith, like, that's the kind of person that I think we should be if we're Christians and working in the political space, which is you're not doing the things that are easy. You're actually doing the hard things, and you're probably taking a lot of flack for it. But because you can envision a better world for not just your side, but for the rest of the world, like for everybody, that's the most important thing. Nobody can do that well unless they have it extremely. I'm reading Dallas Willard right now in small group. Like, you have to have a deeply formed life. Like, you have to be formed in the image, in the way of Jesus. Otherwise, it's going to be really easy to fall off. And of course, there's like so many mistakes I've made along the way, and so many times where I've accidentally prioritized the wrong thing. But I think I'm incredibly blessed to have a community around me that holds me accountable as well and pushes me towards making sure I
Santi,
do my
you're a
best.
Christian who's worked high up in the U.S. Senate. How is it that Christians can follow the way of Jesus in their political work? Like, and what does that look like concretely? Does that mean like never lying? Does that mean like being nice to people at work? Like, and what are really the most important things, right? Because like some seem like really simple things, like oh yeah, just being nice, but others seem like really costly, right? Like, if you can never like tell a misleading thing that might not be directly a lie, but you never want to be misleading. Like that's something that would bar you from a lot of politics in a lot of political arenas. So how would you sum up in as few dimensions as possible what differentiates the way of Jesus in politics versus the way of the world?
Yeah, I wish that I could like look at a pattern that worked for everybody, to be honest. I think the way that Congress is structured is it's like a million little fiefdoms, or 535 to be exact, little fiefdoms that all operate very differently. Ultimately, the very first thing, and I did not prioritize this for a lot of the beginning of my career, but it was like my own personal formation and my own personal disciplines was the first thing I was gonna do is wake up and read Politico or Semaphore or Punchbowl, which those of you who work in politics, those are a necessity for you to read, or was the first thing that I was gonna do is wake up and read a psalm or a proverb. Like, it sounds like that's too simple, but it is as simple as that because if I'm not creating a framework and a filter by which I'm viewing everything I'm doing at the beginning of my day through the lens of scriptures, then it's going to be easy for me to go into a room and lie. It's gonna be really easy for me to go in and like withhold information. It's gonna be really easy for me to cast blame on someone else or on the other side when it might be my fault. But then I also will say like I I think that one of the things that I learned also is if I was going to be a Christian in this space, I was also going to be the best at the job, which meant that I worked the hardest and I was going to do it in a way that was the absolute best. And so I could go into rooms where we're negotiating things. I could be advising on how we're going to externally, and I, would go toe to toe. And I'm not saying that you can't be nice when you do that. And I think you can be, but I would hope that people were really nervous when they had to go into negotiation with me because they knew I was going to be the best prepared and that I was going to win. So I think, and then understanding at points when like winning was not the primary goal, but like loving the other was the goal. Needing to have the wisdom to make the distinction between those two
Mm.
as well.
Santi, I'm going to give you 5 examples of things you might have to do if working in politics or policy. And I want you to share briefly for each of these how you can do it as a Christian faithfully and impactfully. Okay. Okay. So the first thing is making deals in a very competitive situation. Should you ever lie or at least withhold the truth or tell something that's misleading? Like, can a Christian ever do that? What do you say? Is there ever like a white line or a white lie that's permissible? What's your thoughts on
Yeah, I think that you should never lie. I think that's crazy because then you're operating from a deficit immediately, and I don't think that honors. I think that you can always frame things in a way that makes you have the strongest argument, and so I think there's always going to be a way to approach things in a negotiation. You're not always giving everything away, which means withholding certain information or potentially not giving certain things or not holding, like I said, not holding pieces of or holding certain pieces of information until absolutely necessary. But I don't think that you need to be misleading or lie to do well in negotiations.
Nice. Okay, number 2, networking. DC is a place where everybody wants to know what other people are doing. It's the first thing that people ask each other, right? It's how we started this interview. It's like, well, what do you do? Very DC. Sometimes that feels a bit like slimy or transactional. Should like Christians like try to make friendships with people for like the primary purpose of scoring some kind of like political deal if it's for an important cause? Like, how do you approach those relationships being authentic and honest, but also having something to gain?
Yeah. Um, It's all about relationality, like, it is, do I actually, like, love and care about this person and care about their lives? Like, I always had a rule where if I knew that I was eventually gonna need something from somebody, like, I really didn't want that to be the basis of our relationship at all, and, so I, would ask about their pet, I would ask about their kid, I would ask about their parent, so you'll find me in my conversations, like, I
So
don't
that's you giving to them is being friendly, right?
yeah,
It
I mean,
still feels a bit transactional though, if you're doing that because you need something from them, right?
yeah, I think what's interesting is
Can't you just be honest and be like own the dependence, right? And there's a dignity in being dependent. We're all dependent on God, And in the political arena, we're going to depend on certain institutions, fiefdoms with power, and they know that we need them. And maybe we don't need to say it outright in the first meeting, but the fact that we're coming to them and asking about their dog, maybe it's sort of like honoring and bowing down in a
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
respecting the
No, I mean,
position.
I think what I'll say is like my relationships and my friendships are beyond what I need or not. Like, I think like if there's somebody that I just need something from, I'm usually pretty like, hey, like, I'm just curious, like, what this, what XYZ is like, or can you do this or not? Like, I think there's that. But I would say, like, the hardest part that I know that people feel about in politics is that like people are inauthentic and they don't actually care about you. And so like it is an internal question that I have to ask myself. Do I actually like care about this person? And am I going to like be praying for them, follow up with them? Am I going to be doing that just as a person? I meet a lot of really, really interesting people. And I think it's a great part of what I get to do. But I also, yeah, to your point, like it is this internal question that I have to ask myself and I should ask myself because I want to be a good friend and a reliable with anybody I meet, not just, So, but it's a really good question to push because I think it can come off as inauthentic, but I think like the follow up and the relationality of like, is this going to be a long lasting friendship is important.
Okay, related to that, my third question here is about lobbying. And, there's a lot of policy people, staffers that will become like revolving door lobbyists, right? They go from the Hill working for a senator, Republican, to a lobby firm for a particular issue or maybe a broad caucus of issues. It seems like sometimes lobbying, is more about relationships and contacts and finding, who has what who needs. But sometimes money is involved, right? Sometimes it's never in writing or explicitly said, but like the tacit understanding is like money will be needed to donate to a specific person to advance a specific issue, and to a point where it seems like more money in politics and like frankly like legal bribing. So how should Christians approach that space? And is there ever, would you ever say it's permissible for there to be legal bribing for an issue that's just so important, right? Like if it's a matter of like some extremely important bill serving the like poorest of the poor or like the least of these, is that ever permissible, or how do you think about that?
Yeah. It's gosh, that's like the real question that I
You're not
now
representing the views of where you currently work or formerly worked, right? It's all your
and
opinion. Yeah.
I think here's what I'll say. The system in general, writ large, like it is ethically questionable, whether it's legal or not. Like, there's these questions on some of these really hot topics, whether it's abortion or immigration or this, where it's like what is legal and what is allowed in statute doesn't necessarily mean it's the ethically right thing. And so I think those are the types of issues and challenges that I always thought through. And so on this piece in particular, I would say like it is it is extremely dependent on the person. Like there are going to be people who are going to donate even for the best cause in the world just so they can get their foot in the door, and sometimes it's the only way that you can get the foot in the door. I think I would say like me personally, I'm actually like working with some of my colleagues to figure out like what does this actually look like for me? Like how do I do this in a way that is the best not only just for like what yeah, we want to accomplish, but also like I have these like broad visions for how I want to see the world. And like it takes money to make big changes. So like maybe money is necessary. I haven't like gone to the final answer on this, JD. Like I'm trying to like figure that out, but I think it's an interesting challenge. And I think that generally things are not as black and white. And so, yeah, so I think, yeah, you're just catching me at a time where I'm like in the process of thinking about what that looks like for my own self personally. And I think I'm still on that journey.
So my fourth question for you, as a Christian who's worked high up in the Senate about careers in politics and policy, is where do folks in that space get spiritual advising? And like, do churches in DC, especially where so much of this activity is, do they really address some of these hot button issues that are on the heavy on the hearts and minds of staffers? Like, is this something that comes up in Bible studies, or like really where?
Yeah.
Curious what you think.
There's a couple really great organizations that host Bible studies on the Hill, and they have like faith mentorship, and they're trying to work with policymakers to understand. that. And I think that that is really important work. Um, I would go to my pastor and my small group and the community people around me. Like it is, even though it is my, like, it is a job, like it is that. And so, like, just like somebody who might be working at a law firm, or just somebody that might be working at a nonprofit or as a doctor, or any of that might want to bring some of these specific challenges forward. I think everybody should have a community around them where they can work through these questions. In DC specifically, there are some churches that do great about this, and there's some churches that like don't talk about it at all.
Can you name any in particular resources, communities you found really helpful and spiritually
Yeah.
edifying and grounding?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, we both go to Union City Church, and I think it has become a space where I can wrestle with a lot of these kinds of questions with my our pastor and get challenged, get pushback. Like, I specifically offer up myself to sort of process different kinds of things and get pushback. And I think that as Christians, we have to seek that out. Like, it's not just going to be come and like laid at the feet of my like me because I'm a Christian and everybody knows it. Like, think we have to seek it out. And I think that there are folks that work in this space. I would say, I think he was on your podcast, but as well. But Michael Ware is doing some amazing work. Trying with an organization called CCPL, trying to make sure that Christians feel really encouraged and supported when they're doing public service work. People like Justin Giboney and others who sort of have worked in politics and faith, I think are
Do you have
really.
thoughts on the National Prayer Breakfast and to what extent that does or doesn't address some of these, thorny questions or spiritual needs?
Boy, my thoughts on the National Prayer Breakfast is actually, you know, I actually think that's more about money, to be quite
Say
honest
more.
with you. I think a lot of people that are funding that can sometimes, it's not everybody, and so I don't wanna disparage, like, the whole movement, but I've really found that the people who run that can sometimes have differing, end goals.
Do you have like a concrete example of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some individuals who really do meet and pray, and, like, there's some, like, sidebar events outside of the prayer breakfast, and at the prayer breakfast where, like, they really are sitting and praying together and trying to seek these things out, and there's other people who are both, like, on the left and the right who use the prayer breakfast to get what they need politically.
So it's like a networking thing, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's where the prayer isn't happening that there's a problem, is what I'm hearing.
No,
Yeah.
I think we should be praying.
You really walk the walk. So listeners, Santi leads the prayer room, this weekly prayer meeting at 6:30 a.m. at our church, and is up there on the keys and leading us in prayer and worship every week. So you really do walk the walk.
Yeah, I think, prayer is the most important thing, and I think that honest prayer without much of these potential complicating factors like money is probably a better way to do it, and so that is can sometimes be my challenge. I should tell you that, like, the organization that organizes the whole thing, some of the powers that be around it, is actually the reason why I came to DC the very first time. It's why I wanted to
Wow.
even discover GW. So it's really
So you're
amazing.
saying like it roped you into these issues,
It
or
roped me into, like, understand that DC was a place that I could be.
you mean just like the presence of prayerful people or prayerful people?
The organization that sort of, like, organizes it has programs that bring young people into this space. So that was, I kind of accidentally fell into it, but that's the very first time I came to DC was sort of through there.
It's identified as more center right. Is that right?
I think you'll find both, but probably more center right, yeah. Yeah. It totally depends on who you're talking to. I found who's involved with it.
So my fifth question for you as a Christian who's worked high up in the Senate is how do you balance the long hours, right? Like 70-hour plus weeks you were working um, with other sacred commitments in your life to being active in church, serving for your family, and being a good friend. Any advice for Christians who are wondering how to juggle really important needs of the world, advising senators in the world's most powerful country with being a good friend?
Yeah. Couple things. I think Sabbath is a command and incredibly important. And I would hope that if you're a Christian working in this space, that that is a priority and that you rest and take care of and really remain comfortable with not working all 7 days a week. I know that's not possible for everybody, but it could look like that in some sort of way. I was extremely regimented. I still kind of am, but that was the only way that I could make it function. Like, is I would, wake up at a certain hour, have really high standards and strict standards for my team to make sure that they were communicating with me at certain points in certain ways. And then I would make sure I got my sleep. um, but it was regimented in the sense of like exercise as well as spiritual disciplines. I wasn't, I was doing my best. It was not 100% of the time, but I would say 90% of the time, I wasn't, like I said, opening an email before I opened the scriptures. And so I think even in the highest levels, that became more and more important because as stress happens and as all of that happens, I think the greater the importance is to spend time with Jesus. And so I would say that that is the best way to do it. And then also just have people who are on the same walk with you. I knew other Christians who were working in these spaces and there was a lot of need for encouragement and we would. And so I think, being a part of community is really, really, really crucial as well.
Okay, as we wrap up, I have a couple bullet questions, hopefully like rapid fire question, rapid fire answer for you. Is that all right?
Yep.
One might be a slightly longer answer, but I was surprised from an account of a friend of mine who's a future discerning ordination to the priesthood, who had served in a parish, prominent parish in Georgetown, with someone who they recall loved Jesus, knew their scriptures super well, would correct them actually if they cited the Psalms wrong, but graciously and would smile with the correction. And how this friend of mine was dumbfounded when they learned that this person was actually like the senior military advisor to George W. Bush and had like explicitly recommended like a preeminent strike on Afghanistan for weapons of mass destruction. And I think if I recall correctly, even a nuclear strike. So like, what do you do in these cases with Christians who are really faithful, like genuinely faithful and know their Bibles well, but seem to be mistaken on some of the like technicalities of what good policy might look like? Like, is that surprising to you that like someone who knows Jesus well would be so technically mistaken?
No, because I, I think at the time that was actually the most easy thing to recommend, or not, maybe not the easiest thing to recommend, but it was a thing to recommend at the time based on culture, American culture, and um, its obsession with violence, which can be a whole topic for a whole other day. But no, it's not surprising at all. I think what I would say is that like the United States and a lot of places is there's a level of maturity. Like I would say, like I have no reason to believe that somebody who might have recommended that isn't a Christian and doesn't love Jesus. That's not for me to decide. It can't be for me to decide. What I think I can offer is the fact, the idea that it is really important for us to grow in maturity in our faith and to recognize that any decision we make, if we can't put it up against the scriptures and see that we see the fruit of the Holy Spirit working in us, which is like love, joy, peace.
Do you think that he in good conscience could make a policy recommendation like that, loving Jesus?
Yeah, because I think our conscience can sometimes totally, you
So you
know,
think that's a product of a slightly warped conscience,
I
slightly
think it's
warped conscience.
I think it's the product of a mind that has not yet been transformed.
So do you think that when Christians have technical policy mistakes, that it's always from a slightly warped conscience where they maybe think they're doing, when they're not willfully doing wrong, but they're doing something that they think is correct, but it's a conscience problem. It's not an information or mind problem.
Yeah, always is tough for me to agree with just because it's not. I think that there's like a wide range of
Like,
things.
couldn't we live in a world where like well-meaning Christians sometimes disagree with each other on things, but like the way to resolve the disagreement is like more like technical information or morally relevant facts instead of more prayer? Like that's possible, right? I mean, I think people should definitely pray more, right? That's definitely a big problem.
Yeah.
But like if we had more morally relevant information, that also seems like a really important thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I told you I was reading Dallas Willard earlier, and he talks about how we need to form our way of thinking, and that logic is part of it. And he talks about how this inventor who wrote all these beautiful psalms also like created these really like light bulb or something like that. I'm gonna have to go back and look. It's renovation of the heart. We can fact check me later. But talking about how like logic is actually really important. So yeah, I think that's an important factor, but I think it's all of the above. Like we are not just our thoughts and we're not just our spirit. Like we're all our souls are all of that. And so I don't think it's I think some people are more tuned to the facts and are more affected by like if you walk me through something, then I will get there. Whereas others are going to be more prone to like emotional and spiritual sort of kinds of things. Like I think people are often surprised, frankly, at me being like super scientifically minded because I'm also an artist and I like to like music and prayer. And they're like, that's kind of crazy that like, how does those two things fit together? And in my mind, I'm like, well, that's just the fullness of who I am. But I think it's super complicated, JD, because I just and it is a source of my frustration, as you can imagine, because I'm like, how I don't know if you read Pope Francis' biography, but he talks about how he, in his forming of his view on nuclear weapons, it was because he was mentored at one point by the priest who oversaw Hiroshima, who's oversaw the parish in Hiroshima when the United States, like, dropped the bomb on them. And I'm sitting there just being like, of course, Pope Francis felt that way. Like, look who mentored him and who taught him about this issue. I don't know who this person in Georgetown is, and I don't know like what his formation has looked like. And so I don't think it's, yes, I think you can come to different conclusions based on how you were formed. And that does I think there's like ultimate truth, which is like who am I to like actually judge? Because I feel like I probably get things wrong all the time too, but I really often try to just seek what the right thing is.
Santi, we want to respect your time, but thank you so much for sharing these insights. And if you're listening and you want a career that tackles some of the world's most pressing problems and you want to do it with a career in politics, policy, work on the Hill, we have a report on our website. You can go to our resources tab and then to career profiles and to our congressional staffer report, where it's an in-depth guide for this career path. And if you want to meet Santi, come to Union City Church or come to our conference that we're doing where Santi will be leading prayer. We'd welcome you to that. Santi, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.